There's no substitute for obedience. Next.
The program you are about to watch is part of a free series we are making available to you as a gift from Greg Fritz Ministries, entitled Godly Prosperity. Visit gregfritz.org to download the MP3s and watch the streaming video for free by entering code FREE at checkout. Are you tired of hearing bad news? Tune into the good news of the gospel. Welcome to Good News with Greg Fritz.
Hello, I'm Greg Fritz. Welcome to the Good News program. We're teaching a series called Godly Prosperity, and if you've missed this series, you need to get it, and you can, absolutely free. You can go get my study notes and print them out in the study notes section of our website. Just go to the home page, then go to the free download section, and you can stream these episodes in video, or you can download the MP3 audio. And you can get the entire teaching. We've covered a lot of material and a lot of ground, and so rather than review, I just want to refer you to those products. I want to talk today about one of the most important components of prosperity, and that is obedience. There is literally no substitute for obedience. And if that is causing lack, and if that is causing a problem with your source of supply, your channel of supply, then no amount of work and effort is going to make up for that. God requires our trust and our obedience. It's not enough just to believe God and believe His promises concerning prosperity, but we also need to obey Him. And this makes sense. I mean, if you have children, you expect them to believe you, but you also want them to obey you, because it's they're two different things. It's one thing if a child believes what you say, that if you run out in front of a car, you're going to get hurt. They can believe that, but if they go run out in front of a car, they're still going to get hurt. So in some cases, you'd rather them just obey you than believe what you say. But as Christians, we're supposed to do both. And if disobedience is such a detriment that it causes symptoms in various areas, and until you get it right, there's really no making up for it. So we might as well just strive for obedience. And let me give you this example. I always think of this. It's Samuel and his word to King Saul, and he told him this in 1 Samuel 15:3. He said, "Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them." So that is pretty clear. It's pretty clear what God wants Saul to do in this battle. And if you go to 1 Samuel 15:9 and look at the battle and the actual events, it says, "But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were utterly unwilling to destroy them. But everything despised and worthless they utterly destroyed." So they didn't do what God said. They did part of what He said, but they didn't quite fulfill God's request. And God spoke to Samuel and said, "Go talk to Saul. He's disobeyed me again." And verse 13, Samuel went to Saul. And Saul said to him, "Blessed are you of the Lord, for I have performed the commandment of the Lord." Now, he didn't perform the commandment of the Lord. He kind of did part of it. He looked like he was doing it. And to the outside onlooker, it probably looked like he did a fine job. But it wasn't what God said. And man, this is so important. You can fool everybody else in the world. And you can fool your friends, your family. But if you're not doing what God really wants you to do, deep down, you can't fool yourself. You need to be honest. We all need to take a look at what we're doing and why we're doing it. And if the whole world applauds us and says, "Great job," but it's not what God said, then it's not going to be successful. It's not going to be fruitful. It's going to cost. And many times, chronic lack is caused by disobedience. You can't make up for that through anything other than obedience. Let me give you this example. So Saul sounds so religious and so committed and so consecrated. He says, "Blessed are you of the Lord." Well, sounds like a charismatic. "I have performed the commandment of the Lord." And Samuel said, "What then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen which I hear?" And Saul said, "They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed." In other words, he just contradicted what he had just said. He said we did what God said, and now he's saying, well, we saved some of them, the best of them, to sacrifice to God. Well, that's not what God said. God said destroy them. He didn't say bring them in for a sacrifice. So Samuel said, verse 16, "Be quiet, and I'll tell you what the Lord said to me last night." Samuel said, "So when you were little in your own eyes, were you not the head of the tribes of Israel? And did not the Lord anoint you king over Israel? Now the Lord sent you on a mission and said, go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. Why didn't you obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do evil in the sight of the Lord?" And then verse 22, and this is a very famous verse, it says, "So Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams." And this is such an important concept because some people have the idea that they can just kind of do whatever they want on their own terms, and if they sacrifice or give to God, give God enough money, or give God a big chunk of what they do, then it's going to be okay. It's like I've heard people say, if I won the lottery, I'd give God half. It's like, well, aren't you generous? So you're going to get $100 million for nothing, and you're going to give God half. That's real big of you. That's just not how things work. You ought not be going and applying for the lottery. We don't play the lottery. We don't gamble. We don't do some of these things. And yet people think they can justify some of these activities as long as they give to God. And God is saying, I don't want your sacrifice. I don't want your money. I want your obedience. I don't want you to try to prove anything to anybody. I don't want you to try to pay me off. I'd rather you just do what I say. I'd rather you be obedient and obey my commands. And when there is an element of disobedience there, it affects your life. It affects your income. It affects your sense of well-being. There's so many negative symptoms associated with disobedience. And here, Saul literally lost the kingdom because he didn't obey God specifically. And it wasn't, it's not like it was so complicated he couldn't figure it out. It was just an all or nothing thing. You destroy the entire camp of the enemy and don't keep anything. And by keeping things, he was disobeying God, and he thought he could get away with it if he gave those things as offerings to God. That's not how the kingdom works. And no matter how much money you try to give, it's not going to make up for disobedience. And I could say it this way, God's not into just numbers. He doesn't have some sort of figure that if you give this much, then I'm going to excuse all of your mistakes and all of your wrongdoing. That's not how the kingdom works. You can't approach God on those terms. He would rather you obey Him fully and give a smaller amount than to disobey and try to make up for it with what you give. And I know that's a simple statement, but people really do try this in life. This is a real world activity. You can't go out and cheat and lie and be dishonest to make money and then bring it to God and somehow that changes everything. God would rather you make less money and do it His way and give less than to get out there in no man's land and where anything goes and then bring a big portion of that to God to make it right. It doesn't make it right. And I'm sorry to be the one to have to tell you that. But if you're talking about godly prosperity, we've got to do it God's way. And God requires obedience. So, as I've said before, I'm not the judge. I'm not here to say, who is and who's not obeying, and here's what you need to do, and here's what... I have enough on my hands to just pray to God myself and make sure I'm doing what He's told me to do. I will tell you this, when I began to travel and live off of the offerings of people in churches, I took that very seriously, and I prayed. I said, Lord, I want to be good ground. If I'm going to live this way... In fact, the first meeting I went to of any significance, the pastor, I was there for a week, he gave me an offering, and it was, in my experience, I didn't ever make much money, He gave me this offering, and it was like $750 for the week, and I tried to give it back to him. I said, that's just too much money. I can't take that money. And he says, no, it's yours. The people gave it to you. And it hit me, and I went to God and said, God, I want to do this right. How can I be good ground? And the Lord really spoke to me. He said, if you want to be good ground, do what I tell you to do in ministry. Nothing more and nothing less. If you'll do what I tell you to do, then whenever somebody blesses you, they're blessing me. And I have really taken that to heart. As I said, I haven't done everything right, but I have taken that to heart. And therefore, I've never come up with some project or some outreach just to raise money, because people love to get behind projects and outreaches. And if God's telling me to teach the Word, go teach the Word. That's what I'm going to do. And if I could have raised more money coming up with some project in addition to that and made more money, it would have defeated the purpose. I have refused to do that. Now, I have done projects and I have done things. We just raised money for 2 books that we self-published, and they'll be out shortly. But that was something I felt led to do, that I needed to do. And the money came to do that. But to just create an endless flow of projects just to get people to give is just not right. That would be one of those areas where obedience is better than sacrifice. Now, I could do that and raise a lot more money, and in turn I could give more money away and say, look what we're doing. But that takes away from the meaning. It's not worth anything if you're over here in disobedience. And I hope that makes sense to you. You've got to interpret this into your own experience. But people try to do this all the time in one way or another to justify some of the things that they're doing that they feel bad about. And my message is, just get rid of those things. Just stop doing those things. Do this thing right. You can receive godly prosperity if you do it God's way. And His way's the best anyway. And we started this teaching out by saying, if God wanted me to be poor, I would be poor, and I'd be happy to do it. And I thought that was going to be my lot in life until I learned the Scriptures, and I was fine with it. I'm fine to give up whatever I need to give up to serve God. But the fact that He wants to bless us is just a bonus. That's exciting. However, you're going to have to live the life that God has for you. You have to obey God's will for your life. So I was going to share this with you because it's very personal, and it illustrates the point that when you obey God, He's going to take care of you. Maybe not in the way that you would expect, but God's going to stand behind you. So when I came back, I spent a year in Africa and preached in East Africa. It was one of the greatest, most productive years that I'd ever had. And I came home and prayed for several more months about where to go. And the Lord led me to Arkansas to be a youth pastor. Now, I didn't want to go there. Nothing against Arkansas. I just didn't want to go there. And that town was very small, and the church was small. It didn't look like a good opportunity, and it just didn't appeal to me. And I prayed and prayed that God would let me go somewhere else. But I finally came to the conclusion, this is where you need to go. So I went in fear and trembling. And I didn't know if it was going to work. I thought, I could be missing it. It just doesn't seem like there's enough there to really, I don't know if I can survive this. And so I went in obedience. with no job, and the church let me know up front, we're so small, we can't pay you. And I agreed to be their youth pastor for no pay, which meant that I needed to get a job. So here I am in this little apartment in Arkansas, and I was actually going through withdrawals, I think. I was just reviewing my short and pitiful life. I thought, man, I could have gone to college, and I could have gotten an education, and I wouldn't be sitting here in this little town, in this little apartment, and making nothing and working for free. And I was just, thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to survive this? And I had a problem with my bathtub, so I called the apartment, the front desk, and they sent a carpenter over, a handyman over to fix it. So he's in there fixing. He's telling me he's Baptist and he's working on this thing, and he's telling me that this isn't his only job. He's got jobs all over town, and that he's real busy. And I felt the Spirit on the inside prompt me to ask him for a job. So I just said, I'm a youth pastor. That I came to this town to help young people. I'm in this church, and I don't have a job. I'm going to have to support myself. Do you know where I could find some work? I was hoping he'd say, I'm hoping he'd hire me. And he goes, oh, well, you could try Walmart. And so I thought, well, that's the end of that. Before he left my apartment, he stopped, and I know it was God. And he turned around and looked at me, and he said, have you ever done any painting? And I said, no, but I'm honest. He goes, fine, if you want to work for me, I'll hire you Monday. You can start work on Monday, and we're going to go paint. Well, I got a job, and off we went, and we painted, and we did all kinds of carpentry work, and he taught me a lot of things, and he had lots of tools, and I was a carpenter's helper, and I thought, well, so far so good. I haven't starved to death. He's paying me $4 an hour, and I'm able to buy food and clothes and whatever, pay my rent, and so I was happy. And this went on for about 6 months. And after 6 months, my carpenter friend came and he said, well, I'm going to go back to school, so I'm not doing this anymore. And he said, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to find another job. And he said, by the way, I'm not going to be using my tools, my truck. You know how to get into my garage. He said, if you need my tools, you can use them at any time. And I thought, oh, brother, I just lost the only job in town. It's all over for me now. It's been fun, but I knew this wasn't going to work out. And I went back to my little apartment, and the phone rang. And one of the neighbors in town asked me if I could paint a fence. And I wasn't really a great painter, but a board fence? I said, sure, I can paint a fence. You don't even have to use a drop cloth. And you can get more paint on you than you do on it. It doesn't matter, just so you end up getting paint on the fence. So I painted a fence, and she paid me. And while I'm painting the fence, another neighbor saw me out there working and said, hey, I need some work done. And it went like that from place to place. I was able to go to my carpenter friend's house, use his tools. I used his paintbrushes. I used his truck. It was amazing. And I was in business. Well, that went on through the summer into the fall. And then when winter came, it just dried up. You talk about the brook drying up. It dried up, and I knew it's over. And now it's been another 6 months, and I'm out of a job. So I go back to my apartment, and I'm thinking, man, I had the only 2 jobs in this town. This town is so small, they don't even have an economy. I mean, this town is like Mayberry, except it's poor. And I just thought there's just nothing left for me to do. And the phone rang. And it was a local businessman. He had a business that installed satellite dishes. And he said, hey, I have 2 workers that work for me, and one of them didn't show up today, and I've really got this job. Would you be interested in filling in? And so I said, sure. So I went, and you dig trenches, and you go get whatever they tell you to get. And I was a satellite installer's helper. And I did that for 3 days. The boss came to me and said, you know what, I don't think this guy's going to show up. Do you want the job? I said, well, sure. Now I've gotten the only other job in this town. And I thought, man, I am so lucky that this guy had a no-show, because there was nothing else here. I mean, there was no opportunity here. I got the only 3 jobs in this town. And I worked for this guy, and man, I was a satellite helper for 6 months. And I went all over Northwest Arkansas, and we installed dishes, and we worked in the heat and the cold, and it was just, it was amazing. He paid me $4 an hour. After 6 months, he comes to me and he says, well, he said, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm selling out and moving. He said, so you're going to have to find another job. I said, well, I'm getting used to this process. It seems like a 6-month window on all this stuff. Man, I didn't have 1 brook that dried up. I had 3 brooks that dried up. And so I went back to my apartment, and I'm praying, thinking, well, I'm not dead yet. Let's see what else can happen in this little town. And lo and behold, the phone rang. It was one of the kids in my youth group. Her dad had a carpet company, and he laid carpet and tile, and he lost his helper. And they sent word to me, we need a helper if you're interested in laying carpet. And I thought, man, at this point I can do anything. I don't care what it is. And so I go off and start laying carpet and tile with this guy. And I didn't lay it. I still don't know how to lay it, but I could sure bring him a tool. He'd say, bring me another knife. And so I could get a knife and bring me that roll. And I was a helper, carpet layer's helper. And he didn't pay me $4 an hour. He paid me $3.60. And but I did get a raise after a month. He raised it to $3.65. And but there I was working, and once again I had the 4th only job in that town. I had gotten it, and thank God that he lost his help, because man, I don't know what I'd be doing if it wasn't for him. And sure enough, 6 months go by, and he calls me up and says, hey, I don't know how to tell you this. I'm thinking, I already know the end of this story. He goes, I'm going back into construction. I'm not doing carpet laying anymore, and I'm working with a big company, so you're going to have to find another job. And at this point, I had such a confidence in God over that 2-year period. Every 6 months, the channel had changed. It was so dramatic that you had to admit, God is behind this. God's pulling strings somewhere. He is making this happen. He's starting it and he's stopping it, and he's starting it and stopping it. And he's making a point that I have never gotten over. I mean, it is so clear to me that I will never doubt that God is the source of my supply. I don't care if it's a carpet job, if it's a corporate job, if it's a factory job, a sales job, whatever it is that we find, what we put our hand to, God is behind that system, and He's making sure that we get what we need to survive and to thrive and to do what He's called us to do. So at the point when I lost the carpet laying job, my carpenter friend, the first boss, he was back in business. So I called him up and said, hey, I heard you're doing carpentry. He goes, yeah, you want a job? I said, sure. And so I went to work for him again. And I'll never forget it. I was standing on a ladder painting this house, listening to teaching. And it was like the Lord spoke to me and said, you can't do this anymore. And I thought, no, I like it. It's exciting. I've only got 6 months. It'll be something else. I mean, this is fun. You're good at what you do, Lord. I just figured the system out. But He said, no, that's it. No more. I said, but God, I just bought a car and I had responsibilities I hadn't had before. And He said, no, don't do it. He said, you need to go to your boss and you need to resign. Don't do this job anymore. And so it was very clear to me. And we're talking about channels of supply and obedience. They work together hand in glove. So I went to my boss and I said, and he was a Baptist guy, so he loved God and he knew I was a youth pastor and whatnot. And I had already resigned my youth group. The Lord had led me to do that. And I told my boss, I said, I can't do this anymore. He said, what do you mean you can't do it anymore? I said, well, I just can't do this job anymore. And he said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go home, I'm going to get on my couch, and I'm going to pray, just like I've done for the last 2 years. I'm going to pray to God. And he says, well, if it doesn't work out for you, you got a job here if you want it. So I went to my apartment, and I'm saying, Lord, this is different. I've never had to resign a job. I always get laid off. What am I doing here? What are you going to do? The phone rang. It was a pastor in Missouri, which is where I grew up. And he said, I got to ask you a question. He said, we've got a youth camp that we've planned here, and we got 6 churches participating, and we lost our speaker. He said, would you be available to speak at our youth camp? I said, well, when is it? He was, well, that's the problem. He said, it's next week. And he said, I'm sure you're busy. I said, no, I'll be there. I will be there. And so I went to that youth camp and preached at this youth camp, and there were 6 churches involved. All 6 pastors were there, and they all met me, and they all invited me to come preach for them. And what actually happened at that youth camp was God released me to a traveling ministry. That was 30 years ago, and I've been traveling to churches ever since. That was the springboard. And boy, I'll tell you, every 6 months having the channel change is one thing, but traveling for 30 years, I have had so many brooks that have started and stopped and dried up, and you thought they were going to be there and they weren't. And over time, you just begin to realize that, this thing is so much bigger than we are. And if we'll just put all of our attention on obeying God, He'll make sure that for us, for you and I, who have a relationship with Him, that we will be provided for. And it's not dependent on the economy. It's not dependent on the price of goods and services, or the value of the dollar, the price of gold. God is going to take care of His people. Our focus should be to obey. And I got a scripture for that. Matthew 6:33. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. That is a scripture to live by, and that's one of the most important keys to godly prosperity. Well, we're going to stop right here, and we're going to do a different, move into another section of this teaching in our next episode, so don't miss it. You're going to like it. Remember this, until next time, the good news is so good, the bad news doesn't matter.
Being blessed and prosperous is not wrong. Greg Fritz gives you an honest look at God's Word to show that God delights in the prosperity of His people. Call our helpline at 918-749-7744 Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Central Time.
I'd like to take just a second here to promote our YouTube channel. We put a lot of time and effort into that channel, and eventually all of our material goes there. It's broken up into series, and it's done in sequence, and you can watch all the series we've done on this program on our YouTube channel. The best way to get there is go to my website and click on the YouTube link, and then do me a favor and subscribe while you're there. We want to get our numbers up so we can reach more people than ever before.
Join us next time for Good News with Greg Fritz.
GregFritz.org offers many free resources on a variety of topics, such as how to let go of your past, live worry-free, hear God's voice clearly, and receive God's best in your life. Visit GregFritz.org to download free teachings that will change your life today.